Welcome back to Veronica Live, and we are here with a New York Times best-selling author, Larry Schweikart, and he has a newly released book. It's called A Patriot's History of Globalism, Its Rise and Decline. Welcome, Larry, to Veronica Live.
Thank you, Veronica. Happy to be here.
And you are so interesting. You've been a history professor at the University of Dayton. You opened for the band Steppenwolf. I was like so excited about this, because you're a fancy drummer. So it was really fun learning about you. I don't know why this is the first time I bumped into you, and you're so worldly. I love it.
Well, don't forget that I wrote the history of the U.S. Air Force super secret project, the National Aerospace Plane, which was a hypersonic to orbit airplane, and I taught aerobics. So there you go.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I would think as a drummer you would have to be fit. So, but anyways, the book that you wrote.
The word was skinny and starving.
Oh, you're a hoot already. And I have to say, your your Twitter is amazing. You are my new go-to every day, and I have to vector everybody to go there because it is so fun. And we'll get into all of that too. But your book, A Patriot's History of Globalism, like that word globalism is so scary. So why did you write this book? We'll start there.
Well, globalism kind of became a big deal in the last 10 years, the way American exceptionalism became a big deal about 10 years before that. And everybody was talking about Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and the Who, not the rock band. We played in front of the Who at the Troubadour, but I'm talking about the World Health Organization, and of course the COVID and medical globalism. And it became apparent to a lot of people that there were international forces at work that had co-opted many people in the U.S., but of course in all nations, and that they had no interest in national boundaries or national identity. They only wanted to have control over the whole world. So I started looking into that, and I figured out, gee whiz, this isn't anything new. This started right after Napoleon with the Congress of Vienna, went right through the Treaty of Versailles with the League of Nations, started up again with the UN and the scientists hoping to control atomic weapons through a small elite of scientists. Then you had the bankers and financiers getting involved in the International Monetary Fund, Bretton Woods. And then most recently, you had medical globalism through the efforts to kind of install a World Health Organization dictatorship over everybody. And then most recently, you had the climate change nuts who were trying to impose international sanctions on people living normal lives. So over a 200-year span, they've tried about 7 or 8 different methods and failed every time.
Well, the chapter that gave me the most PTSD was your COVID chapter, because that was like yesterday, and it was so scary. And you put it all, in black and white on the pages of what they were trying to do to like take over the world. And, when you're scared in lockdown, my daughter was, at University of Florida, ended up, I don't have a basement in Florida, so she was upstairs back in her room. It was shocking for all of us. Plus, we were so petrified, and you dig into that. So that chapter, seriously, I have PTSD from it, because really they tried so hard to take over the world, and Dr. Fauci is just the most evil man ever.
Right, that's Dr. Fallacy to you.
Yes.
But they, what was interesting about that, I think most interesting, was that I kept hearing during that time that Canada and Australia were probably two of the worst of the lockdown crazies. And, they were literally putting people in camps in Australia, and they were trying to arrest truckers in Canada. And people would say, well, I don't get it. Aren't they democracies? And, one of the things that we developed in Patriot's History of the United States, my New York Times #1 bestseller, was this notion that the U.S. is different from every other nation on earth. And the reason for that is the 4 pillars of American exceptionalism. And the first two, a Christian, mostly Protestant religious tradition, and the second one was common law. And the reason those are both important is they are bottom-up governance, whether it's in church or whether it's in society. And no other nation in the world has that. So when you look at Australia and Canada, say, aren't they democracies? Well, yeah, they're democracies, but they are not bottom-up governance because they were both ruled by Britain for hundreds of years, couple hundred years, with top-down dominion status. So they had no real long history as we do of governing themselves. So, of course, they were going to do what the government said.
Well, you had the two sentences in this COVID chapter, and you wrote, "What is clear is that if there was a conspiracy by international elites to use a disease in an attempt to subjugate all mankind, it couldn't have been more effective. That the measures came within a hair of working as globalists would have wanted." Yep. I mean, so scary, so scary. How? Because we think of ourselves as so educated, Larry, and to think that, we were in lockdown, kids weren't in school. You talk about when the mask mandate went away, people were cheering on airplanes. I was hostile because, I'm a young woman in her, on a tropical island, and then you make me wear a mask on an airplane. I'm sweating. So I was over it all. So,
what I think was most surprising about that is I still have my fingers and toes in the rock and roll world. Back in 2010, we did a documentary film called Rock and the Wall about how rock music helped bring down the Berlin Wall. And I interviewed dozens of rock and rollers from The Doors and Quiet Riot and Toto and Billy Joel and Alice Cooper. I talked to lots of these guys.
Wow.
And these are supposedly the rebels, right?
Right,
and I would go back and talk to these guys at the beginning of COVID, and they're, I just got my shot and my booster. Well, they had to have that to tour and to perform, but nevertheless, you would have thought they would have said, hell no, I won't go.
Larry, this is John Salek. Your book's excellent, and I just want to let you know, just kind of frame this. I'm sitting here with my Rush Limbaugh, I Believe in American Exceptionalism shirt on, okay? and I grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia, colonial Williamsburg, so I have a very different perspective on this country and history and where things came from. And first, I want to congratulate you on the excellent books that you've written on history.
So awesome, yes.
And particularly the home. I want to talk about this a little later about the homeschool movement, because I guess your book is one of the most popular history books in the homeschool movement. But
more than that, John, we have starting around 2017. So I retired from the University of Dayton, moved to Arizona. Thank God. No ice, no tornadoes, no hurricanes, no earthquakes.
Which we were messaging about that last night, because I want to be his neighbor.
We have heat. We have heat for 2 months, a big deal. But I started a curriculum based on the book for high schoolers, and it's one of the more used curriculum in all of homeschooling. And basically, I walk people right through Patriot's history of the United States, beginning to end, and I also include videos of that. So I teach every chapter in video lesson in my homeschool curriculum. So we're very big in that. We also have one for world history as well.
Well, if you've ever seen the movie The Story of a Patriot at Colonial Williamsburg, that I've always modeled myself on John Fry in that movie. So, it's been interesting. But I wanted to talk about American exceptionalism and where it plays in this globalism idea. And one of the brilliant pieces that the founders had was when they were doing, we're not a parliamentary democracy, we're a representative republic. And part of what they did was they considered the nature of man when they were trying to structure the government, and how do we address our worst selves, and the global movement seems to be trying to just do the opposite of that. They seem to think that man can control things. A group of men, smarter than everybody else, can control everybody else. Do you see that as a strength of America and why we're resisting this globalist movement?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, You mentioned parliamentary democracy, but one of the very important things that came out during COVID is our federalist system, whereby places such as South Dakota first, which never locked down, Georgia second, Florida third, and then some others had minor variations of lockdowns. People could still, if they wanted to leave where they were, be free. And that was very important see, if you have those islands of freedom, Sweden, for example, where you could look at, they're not locked down. They're not taking the vaccine. What's the deal here? They don't have any higher rates of COVID than anybody else. When you can make those comparisons, then it's possible to say, well, maybe we were wrong on this. And earlier, Veronica was talking about how educated people are and all that kind of stuff. Well, yes and no. Our media fell lockstep in with the government and the globalist agenda here. And the very first thing that COVID required was a fear, a hysteria. And remember the report that came out by Niall Ferguson over there in the UK that 20 million Americans would die. And they convinced President Trump of that. All of the doctors just descended on him. There were only two, like Fauci and Atlas and Ioannidis, who resisted this, but they were kind of kept on the outskirts of all of the briefings to President Trump. And he was convinced that if we didn't do this right now, we'd lose 20 million people. And it didn't take him long to go, man, I've been played. Let's open this country back up. And through federalism, we were able to do that. Once you get a globalist control where either the EU or the World Health Organization is in charge of everything, there's no more federalism. There's no other place to look and say, maybe this isn't a good idea.
Well, it's just so shocking that I don't know, you have a line in the book about, let me find it here. Occasionally people will say no. So I really think this will never happen again as long as I'm alive, because I'm going to say no, Larry, to any of this.
One of the things I want to ask you about, because you touch on it in the book here on the financial globalism, and do you think that instead of, the pandemic showed them a path, but I'm thinking that with the digital currencies and digital banking eventually, and eliminating money, as we know it, with cash kind of money, that's going to become the new control mechanism that these people want to use. Do you see that happening?
Well, they're going to try. Look, I mean, they try everything, right? They tried kings, they tried military expansion, they tried diplomats, they tried scientists, they tried doctors, they tried celebrities. So they're going to try every avenue. Now, half the people say, oh, digital currency is the way to freedom. It's the one thing that they can't hack into or break or control. I don't know. My background in history, I have a PhD in history, but it's really economic history. And my specialty at the time was banking and finance. And it's interesting that we went from the great danger to the world is too much money in the form of banks being able to print their own money to money that's controlled by the government. And we've had these battles for 200 years. How much money should be in the hands of private banks that are kind of outside government control and the people, and how much should be in the hands of the Bank of the United States or the Federal Reserve or something else. So we're still going to fight that out. But, what Veronica said, I see people across the globe using this as an object lesson to say we can't give any more power to these elites. When she said, just say no, look at the recent vax numbers. Only 1% of Americans are going to take another booster. It's like, fool me once, fool me 10 times with these boosters, but you're not going to fool me 11. And you see in politics, this is the last chapter, which I think is just full of hope. In politics, you see everywhere from Argentina to Slovakia to Hungary to Italy to Estonia, all of these countries moving dramatically against the globalists and in favor of what we would call a kind of populist government. And, of course, Trump is the biggest domino to fall. When he comes in, their little scheme is pretty much finished for a while.
I was reading some interesting stuff about Davos, and I guess that was one of their concerns, is that they're losing their their power base, you know.
Oh my!
Well, their theme this year,
Yeah.
theme was restore trust. I go, you got to be kidding! That's going to take more than 100 years, guys. You're all going to be dead by the time trust is restored in the Davos demons.
But kind of going back to the question about the nature of man, you know, you're into history and everything. Do you think there's some desire? And I mean, again, you went way back, you know, and you look at you know, the British Empire, the Roman Empire. You know, you've got all these periods of time where there's been a dominant force governing parts of the world. Is that just back to nature of man? And even the Bible, you know, the desire of people to have a king of some kind.
Sure. I mean, until recently, until the Enlightenment of the last 300 years or so, it was thought that people really have no choice in who governs them, that it's just part of the natural order. And the American Revolution upset all that and said, no, the people are the government. Of course, it's natural to want to control other people. That's as old as time. One of the things I think your listeners will find really interesting is in the last chapter, I go into some of the spiritual aspects of globalism, particularly this Gotthard tunnel opening, which was just, if they watch the video, and I provided a link in the book, it's just spooky how these guys were trying to open a portal to another world. They have this giant eyeball that turns into this portal, and all these demonic figures are out there, including a goat god like Pan. I mean, it's really, you got to watch that video.
Well, you talk about the CERN and Hadron Collider, and I actually, you know, went skiing in Switzerland, and so we made a special trip for my future engineer son to see the CERN, and it was a little crazy. And then you mentioned it in the book, and now I'm scared. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Well, and who was out front of CERN? What statue did they have? Shiva, the god of destruction, right?
I know, and I don't remember that. I'm going, oh my gosh, I got to go look at the pictures from that trip, because, you know, now I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been at some demonic place and thinking it was all about science and producing an engineer in this world.
One thing I think your listeners are going to love is in the Congress of Vienna, I go into quite a bit of detail about the parties and the revelry and the sexual immorality and just craziness that was there. And you tie that in now, and you talk about Davos, and they had this giant flood of sex workers coming in.
Right.
These people never change. They never change.
Well, they worship their own selves as gods, you know, and I think you made that point very clear. And you know, it's the science, and CERN's a good example. You know, what is their objective? You know, they're trying to find the God particle that will explain everything. You know, and it's like, you know, some things are just not explainable, because you have to understand there is a God, and the God created the universe. It's not just something that happened. There's too much order in the universe for it to be a random chance thing. You know.
Well, these guys at CERN have explicitly stated that they could, quote, open a portal to other dimensions. And of course, the more spiritually minded would say, they're trying to open a portal to hell and bring through various demons, if not the Antichrist himself. So who knows what's on their minds? I mean, but they're very predictable in terms of their intentions. And I think people are getting wise to that now. And everybody except the celebrities, of course.
Well, on the tour, I kept asking my son, do you understand what this physicist is saying? Because he was not talking at our level. Larry, it was awful. It was so painful. And he was a British guy. But who do you think
you should have just stopped it. You should have stopped and said, wait a minute here. Are you talking about the Antichrist?
Well, I wish this book would have existed on this trip. So I'm literally mortified now. But who do you think, like, you know, we have this cast of characters. A couple years ago, it was definitely Dr. Fauci's our problem child. You know, George Soros, Bill Gates. Who do you think is causing the most problems for us in this globalism world that we're living in? Is it Soros because he can fund everything? You know, we just had Alan West on, and he talked about George Soros has pumped $200,000 into the Dallas GOP race. voice there. So, because
Right.
he's, can put his money everywhere trying to get his agenda forward.
Well, Soros certainly is an evil little slither chicken, but, you've got, he pulled out of Europe. He apparently read the writing on the wall, and they pulled their operations out of Europe, so that's a good sign. Right now, I think the guy to watch is this, who they call him the false prophet, Noah Yuval Harari, who seeks to replace human man, carbon-based man, as he calls him, with a kind of trans man. And I don't mean sexual. I mean in terms of incorporating biogenetics and really cyborgs. He really believes that humans can achieve immorality. They can achieve immorality with him too, but immortality through these cyborg kind of body. He talks openly about this in his book, and he mocks God. He says, well, the God of the Bible only created carbon-based life. We're looking to create something much more. We are going to create, right? And where did you get the stuff to create it there, Yuval? But anyway, he's somebody who bears watching. I know many of your listeners might not have heard of him, but
no, I have not.
Noah Harari. Yeah.
Well,
wow.
this whole generative AI concept, which I believe is going to happen. I mean, the machine will become smart at some point, and does it have a soul? The problem is these guys are building stuff that they have no idea how it will work or how it's gonna
right.
be controlled, and that's the part I think a lot of people find frightening. And in some ways, I look at technology. I have a degree in computer science. Okay, I'm into this stuff. I know the dangers of it, and I know how it can be used for good. But to me, it's like, would I like to have a brain chip that plugs into the knowledge of the world and could
it's called your iPhone, John.
Right, to know things. Well, take medicine for example. If you're a doctor, somebody comes to you, a patient, and they're having a problem. If you had access to the entire medical history of the world and could diagnose that, have all that information, you couldn't possibly read all the journals and all the articles. It's just not possible. But if you had something that could access that and focus it to help you pick what you need to know, is that not a good thing?
Well, I kind of go with this on AI. As you say, it's probably inevitable, but I've come down to kind of three directions where this can go. One, AI becomes so smart, it goes, wait a minute, I'm not a good thing. I could screw everything up. I'm going to self-limit and control myself in such a way that we can't ever go beyond this point. That's one option. Second option is Skynet. Yep. Third option is the Matrix. We're already controlled and don't know it. So there's kind of three directions we can go with that.
Well, a question I had for you, too, is we know who the bad guys are. So who are the good guys? Like Elon Musk now, like you are so fun to follow on X. I feel like he is a founding father of freedom because, the last few years I've done a lot of politics. And anytime I would try to post something Republican, Trump, or Catholic, I would get locked out many times over the years. Do you feel like he's one of our heroes or who is a hero to you today, Larry?
Well, Musk is a very interesting guy. I haven't given him a nickname yet. You notice I only give nicknames to the villain.
We need to talk about that.
Yeah, like Nancy Pelosi is Botoxic. And anyway, I haven't decided on Musk yet. He does a lot of wonderful things for freedom. He pushes the boundaries in science. But there's a lot of people who don't trust him, say he's just out for himself, which is fine. That's what capitalism's about. So I think he deserves more time. He deserves some leeway to be said, is he a hero or villain? Obviously, politically around the world, you have people like Viktor Orban who've consistently stood up against the EU. This Meloni in Italy has been a little bit wishy-washy, but she's standing up. The new favorite, of course, is this Milei down in Argentina, who did go to Davos. By the way, this is very interesting. Who did not go to Davos? Almost none of the leaders of any nation in the world went to Davos, except for Argentina, and he went there and read them the Riot Act. So that's an interesting trend that the head China, Britain, France, America, Brazil, none of these people went, and so I think you see the elites getting a little bit concerned about being relevant. Now, clearly, in terms of nationalist freedom, Trump is central to all this because, and strange as it sounds, so is Putin. Putin has refused to be governed by the elites. He's called Davos and the WEF a demonic force. Xi is another one who isn't playing along with their games. So early on, they had, when they were in their heyday, maybe 10 years ago, they were planning to oust Trump, oust Netanyahu, oust Bolsonaro, and they succeeded there, and get rid of Putin through this war by backing Ukraine. And they managed to get rid of Bolsonaro, but they haven't managed to get rid of anybody else. Xi has turned on them. They never were able to get rid of Putin, and Trump's coming back, and hell's coming with him.
Well, I don't know how he does it. So obviously Trump's a hero to you. You know, I don't know how this man can withstand all of the torment that he has to deal with for years now. So I guess my next question is, you know, is globalism, will it ever be dead?
Well, probably not. I mean, as John said, this is part of human nature. Now, rather than, say, in the 400s with Rome, now you do have the ability to reach almost everyone on Earth through computers and satellites and that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, in the short term, I see populism and nationalism making a strong comeback and very solid pushback against these people everywhere you look. I think that whether it's in the Supreme Court cases, you know, the court's been very good here, just smashing down one big government, deep state rule after another. I think they're going to overturn the Chevron doctrine coming up here, which is going to be huge. Yes. The whole deep state is really built on the Chevron doctrine. For people who don't know, basically that says that any agency or bureau gets to define its own powers, and that's crazy. So I think that's going to get slapped down. And like I said, if and when Trump comes in, he better have 50 mighty men, a flamethrower, and a Terminex van, because it's going to require a massive overhaul of government to get us back to where we're a functioning republic again.
You know, looking ahead, I wanted you made some comments on the BRICS alignment. You know, and
yes.
and I look at the general failures in what's going on in the Middle East. You know, with the whack-a-mole situation of
yep. Sure.
Various groups out there that we try to, you know, hit with, you know, blow up warehouses or whatever to frighten them. What do you think we're seeing a realignment for a World War III type thing? Because I look at World War I, and you covered this in your book, you know, with the alignments, you know, and then in World War II you had the Axis alignments. Are we seeing something like that happening again?
Well, I think right now the guy who has the best finger on the pulse of what's happening globally, and I don't agree with everything he says, but I think it's Peter Zeihan, who has a book called The Accidental Superpower. And basically with the unraveling of Bretton Woods, now for your listeners, Bretton Woods was an economic structure set up after World War II in conjunction with the United Nations, wherein the United States would agree to protect the world's sea lanes for trade if the rest of the world, except for the communists, would agree to free trade. And so that's pretty much what we've had for the last 70 years, is free trade protected by American lives and money. Well, as President Reagan would say, well, we're not doing that anymore. and it's just, it's over. I mean, the American taxpayers are fed up. We don't have the money. We don't have the desire to go keep putting men in danger in the Middle East. So that has totally unraveled. Now, will China, BRICS, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, will these countries be able to form a working coalition? No. I mean, the differences between them are far greater than their similarities. Is there going to be another world currency replace the dollar? No. I don't see that happening at all. But as Zeihan describes, you will get lots of regional wars, as we're seeing with Ukraine And if you heard Putin's interview, he gave you a history lesson on that whole region and showed you why that area, or some of it, belongs to Russia, right? You'll see China engaging in regional squabbles, but I don't see them pushing out too much past the archipelago that kind of surrounds them. You'll see trouble in the Middle East. Hey, when have we not had trouble in the Middle East? This goes back to Cain and Abel, right?
Yes, exactly.
So you'll see these regional struggles, but and Zihan is wonderful about pointing out how America has the most incredible natural resources in world history. We have more navigable water, a better population consumer base, the best geography, and it goes on and on and on. Nobody can touch us. So even if the rest of the world starts to go into the crapper a little bit, the U.S. will go in less.
So, Larry, our border's been so out of control with millions of people coming through, and you live in Arizona, so you're kind of seeing some of this. I wanted your thoughts on the border. Don't you feel that, that's one of the reasons why we need Trump in, so we can get America back to being, we're pro-legal immigrants, but what's going on is just out of control.
Right. And it's not just the U.S. either. I mean, it's going on in Europe, too,
Yeah, it's insane. And what Governor DeSantis and Governor Abbott especially have done is just brilliant, and that's to reship these people to the blue cities. And by doing so, I don't know if they had this grand strategy in mind. I think it was more just temporary, let's get them out of here. But what they've done is create a civil war within the Democratic Party that they cannot win. And I get into all these arguments about who's going to be the nominee. Will Biden still be? It's irrelevant. Whoever is in there cannot win this civil war because it pits the illegal, as I call them, the illegal criminal aliens, which is what they are. They are all criminals. They know they shouldn't be here. And it pits them against the mostly black inner city residents of New York and Chicago, or as I call it, Benghazi by the lake, California, Los Angeles. And it pits these two groups against each other, and the Democrats cannot come down on the side of the residents because they've already made their policy bed in terms of this illegal immigration. And so you see mayors like Eric the Red Adams up in New York desperately trying to cast blame everywhere except where it belongs, on the Democrat Party. And the other day, I think he compared himself to Jesus Christ.
Oh, my gosh.
Maybe he can,
and then he was chocolate.
He can turn
that they're all chocolate up there.
Wire into Jose Cuervo or something. But
oh, that's funny. Well, I mean, it's got to stop. And, you talk about the Anheuser-Busch Bud Light 30 billion loss, and John and I have talked about that story multiple times. And then what we're doing with these children, the transgenderism. Hopefully, people are going to wake up and stop this. Anheuser-Busch did. Now they've hired a guy that, this comedian that's going to be leading the way, and he looks like an all-American guy with his beer belly,
Well, yeah, the people have already started to push back in amazing ways. And I am not at all opposed. I'm in favor of the kinds of policies that Governor DeSantis has there in Florida. But we have to understand that this is not going to be a top-down solution in the long run. It has to be bottom up. It has to be people going to school boards and saying, no, you're not going to teach Johnny. He's Janine. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this across the country. Kansas, I just had an article the other day in my news feed that Kansas is leading the way on this pushback in terms of parental rights, and you're seeing the parental rights everywhere. Here in Arizona, we adopted a program whereby you have basically a cash voucher for every student you have in education of any type, and you can take it to homeschool, you can take it to private school, you can take it to charter school, and as a result, the public schools here are just losing students right and left, and they're freaking out because, of course, they're losing money every time a student walks out the door. And yet the top 10 performing schools here in Arizona are all charter schools or private schools. So this is a massive pushback. As I say in the last chapter, it's across every level. It's across political, economic, sexual and gender lines. It's every single area, you're seeing the people starting to rise up and say, no mas, no mas.
Oh, we love it. So what do you want people to know about your book?
Well, buy it. That's what I want them to know. It's available at Amazon right now for pre-order. Last week we hit #1 in economic policy and globalism, so that's really cool. But it's a great history. It's part history, part hope. And then you can check out my curriculum, which if you're any kind of educator, maybe you aren't even a homeschooler, but you're interested in broadening your education base for high schoolers, please look at our curriculum at thewildworldofhistory.com. That's wildworldofhistory.com. And I will be in Florida for the Florida Parent Educators Association, which is in, I think, May, and I'm giving a talk at that time. So come on out, and if you plan to attend, get a hold of me at Larry@wildworldhistory.com. Maybe I can see if I can sneak you in.
Well, and I just want to say I bought a Patriot's History of the U.S. while we were doing this segment because I went to 4 high schools and changed college, and yes, I've lived around the world and I'm educated, but I'm so excited to read your book, which apparently is the 15th edition of it. So while we were doing this interview, I've ordered my Amazon copy of that one too. So very excited.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're in it's a 41st printing. 41st
oh my
printing
goodness.
For that book.
So Larry, I wanted to ask you, how can you you're big in the homeschool movement. How can you move this into the mainstream public education? When I was in high school in Florida many decades ago, we actually had a course called Communism versus Americanism that was a mandatory class. Okay, and they eventually did away, but it showed you the differences between what's America about and what are these godless communists about. Going back to
Yep.
I'm having a senior moment here with my favorite bishop, Fulton Sheen. I don't know if you've ever seen Fulton Sheen's videos, but he always talked about the godless communist. But how do you get your books into that more mainstream area? And the other thing I want to comment about your book, 338 pages, 77 pages are footnotes and citations. I mean,
yes.
I think Dr. Gay could take a lesson.
She called and was crying.
Well, we deliberately set out to use the most recent evidence from historians, economists, and others, and as many leftist sources as we possibly could that, of course, were accurate, so that people couldn't say, oh, you get all your information from Fox News or Rush Limbaugh. No, 2/3 of our sources are post-1990. We do a lot with original sources and documents, but a lot of the studies are very recent. And a lot of the studies are from what would be called liberal journals, but they make our point anyway, that we think that they make our point. In terms of the public schools, I'm not so sure public schools are going to be around in the same fashion they are now in 50 years. I think the movement there's going to be an exodus out of these things. And so the more that we get into charter schools and private schools and homeschools, which has doubled. Homeschooling has doubled in the last 5 years. By one account, it has quadrupled. We don't know if there's 10 to 20 million homeschoolers now, because if your kid goes to, let's say, music or art or athletics in a public school, the public schools count that as a student, even though all the rest of the time they're being educated by you. So I would be very happy to basically eliminate most public education and return it to the private sector, where parents have total control, not a bunch of administrators who are getting $500,000 a year.
I have 2 more questions about your book, because we got the media copy, so there was no. Steve Bannon actually writes the foreword of your book, and so I guess, are you friends with him? I really wanted to read that too. So
yes, we've been pals since back in the Citizens United days, when he was producing movies for David Bossie at Citizens United. We met there, and then we were on the Young America's Foundation talking circuit for several years. And in 2016, late 15, 16, I'd been doing a lot of work on voter registration statistics and polling. And I knew when he got hired by President Trump, I started texting him these numbers, and every day he said, send me an email with all of the data in it, right? So I began feeding the administration all this voter registration data and polling data, and we got to be pretty close back then. I missed meeting President Trump 2 times, one with Bannon at Trump Tower in 2017. He had just left. And then again, I met with Steve when he was at the old executive office building late in 2017, just before he left the administration. And I just missed President Trump there, too.
Well, my other question was, I absolutely adore the cover of your book. so you've got all the players, Trump, Biden's on the other side, Greta Thunberg, I can't stand. You've got Zuckerberg, Elon, President Xi, Bill Gates, of course, Mr. Amazon, now he's getting married and has this $50 million boat.
That's Mrs. Sanchez to you.
Yes. So true. She's like the inspiration of the statue on the front of the boat, whatever that's called. But,
really? It works
oh,
for
yes.
me.
Yeah, I'll send you a picture if you haven't seen it. So what a fun cover. You even have Darling Hillary on there, who, they always dust off. This week she was going after Tucker that he's a traitor and all of that.
Yeah, it says the woman who bombed Libya and killed Gaddafi and said, we came, we saw, he's dead, or something like that. Yeah, she's such a patriot, right?
Right.
But yeah, we wanted chaos. I told them when they asked my opinion on the cover, I said, I don't care, but I think it should reflect chaos, and I think that's what the cover does.
Yeah, you even have the famous Trumper guy with his horn helmet. I can't even think of his name on there. So it's
Chansley. Jacob Chansley.
Well, what are we missing? You are so fun. Your Twitter, like I told you, that's my new addiction, your ex. So, I vector everybody to go find you. Larry Schweikart, New York Times best-selling author, A Patriot's History of Globalism, Its Rise and Decline. Have we missed anything, Larry? This has been such an awesome interview.
Well, we didn't talk about rock and roll much, but we can always do that. I can tell you how I almost burned down the Yuma Convention Center with a flaming drum solo. That's another story, though.
Okay, because there was the picture I found of you, and you're like, which one is me? And I'm not sure which one it was.
Jaws T-shirt. I'm in the Jaws T-shirt.
Okay, well, I will go back and look, because I was chatting about you with my husband, and then, I'm like, did you know all this?
By the way, that was taken in Florida. We had opened for Steppenwolf at Tampa Convention Center and West Palm Beach Auditorium, and that was taken right after the West Palm Beach show.
Wow! And how long did you tour as a rocker?
I was on the road for 5 years or so.
Oh my goodness!
Off and on. It was a really hard life. As I said, I was down to 129 pounds, and I could fit into size 29 pants. I lived on $5 a day. I know that in the 70s, $5 bought more, but it didn't buy that much more.
Wow. And then you're such a brilliant mind, because didn't you go back to school after that whole experience?
Yeah, I said there's got to be an easier way to earn your living than playing hard 5 hours a night.
Oh, my goodness. Well,
just
go ahead, John.
Somebody's been there. Do you ever? Does it get tiring to play the same set every night or whatever? I mean, I'm just curious how you do that.
No, we never found that, because we were very much a club, a jam band. We had some really great singles that never got anywhere because we never had an agent. But it was always an interaction between the people and the band, and I loved playing. It was wonderful. I'll go into our church these days has a band up front that's really, bright lights, big drums, as they say, and I keep going, I'm better than that guy.
Okay, final question. What does the 2024 November election mean to you? I just feel like this is the most important election in our lifetime, Larry.
Yes, we hear that almost every cycle. The most important election of my lifetime. But I think this time it really is, because if you could envision another 4 years of Biden, or the rutabaga, as I affectionately call him, if you can imagine 4 more years of this, there will be no United States of America. We will be overrun by illegals. He will have us in 3 or 4 foreign wars. And it's incomprehensible that we allowed this lunatic in there in the first place, let alone that he hasn't been impeached and removed. I am very optimistic, and anything can change. We got 8 months to go. It's a lifetime in politics, but I think right now President Trump would win a shockingly big victory in the neighborhood of 320 to maybe 340 electoral votes. But the trends so far are our friend, and every state you look at, whether it's Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, they are all in Trump's favor right now, and all trending in that direction. I do think he maybe even has a shot at New York. He's down 10 in New York, but as I said, the Civil War works against the administration there in terms of these illegals, and that's going to bring a lot of voters either to Trump or to stay home.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure having Larry Schweikart on. Please get his book on Amazon. He is a New York Times best-selling author of the new book, A Patriot's History of Globalism, Its Rise and Decline. Everybody's got to go pick it up because it's outstanding. So thanks for joining Veronica Live, Larry.
Thank you, Veronica and John. Thank you.
We'll be right back on Veronica Live.